So I got a question from Twitter just a few minutes ago.
Ooh.
By Mo. I think the gist of it is assuming we have cognitive limits because we're humans and there's a limit to our cognitive
like
abilities.
Bottlenecks and stuff?
No.
No.
Maybe we could never understand cognition because of these limits. Does that sound reasonable, plausible?
Yeah. So I think it's sort of like a philosophical argument I've seen around where like, oh God, how does this go? And maybe you remember, excuse me, that like, it's almost like set theory in math where in describing a set, it can't describe itself or something. Is that right? Like some weird thing?
I'm not familiar with the set theory idea, but
yeah.
There's certainly theories like the multi-universe theory that...
Well, no, this was just me. You were reading, so you weren't listening. So I think the idea behind that question is, we are fleshy, constrained things. Can we ever fully understand and study ourselves in a way that, like, we can study other organisms because we are not them and we have sort of an advantage over them? And it's an interesting question. I'd like to think that we could potentially get to a point where we can explain like our consciousness. But yeah, I mean, going back to the horribly late patron live stream, clips of which are available on this channel, talking about Elon Musk and his push for basically combining humanity with AI. If that is the way we end up going, I think that would probably give that like step up and be able to look back at humanity and look in a more objective way that's not constrained by the fleshy bits between our ears. So I'd like to think we're clever enough to be able to figure out ourselves at some point. I mean, if we can figure out subatomic particles without being able to see them just looking at measurements, I'd like to think we can figure out ourselves and our consciousness and how we work and things.
Is there any limit to our cognitive abilities in your mind? Like,
absolutely.
Well, could you expand on what we're limited to conceptualize in our cognition?
Well, so the limit that is just jumping to mind because of my research background. Hi, Mr. Placey. I'll get you in a sec. So the limit that I am absolutely the most familiar with is attention. My opinion, the best explanation or analogy for attention is it's like a swimming pool. You have this quantity of attention at any given point in time, and you can devote all of the attention to something, and so all those resources, all that pool water is going to this one task. Or you can sort of divvy up the attention to different tasks. So like when you're driving, some of it is going to the driving task, and there's many subtasks involved in driving. Some of them are more automatic, like where the pedals are, how hard you need to push. Lane keeping is relatively automatic. A lot of it you've just learned how to do. Automatic processes require less attention, so that's cool. Other things, like if you're in rush hour traffic, are controlled. So you need much more attention to be able to pay attention to the 20 million cars around you, some going like 100, some going 50 miles per hour, because this is California. That requires a lot of attention. And so if you then bring in a phone call and try to have a very deep, engaging conversation with somebody on the phone, you're running the risk of pushing some of those attentional resources off onto other things that aren't the driving task. And when you're distracted, you're more likely to have an accident. So, yeah.
So now that you've nicely hit that attention hammer that attention nail with your attention hammer, is there any limit to what we can understand based on our limited cognitive abilities? That's when I mean,
Right.
there's lots of things like our memory
Right.
that are limited, but not
Ish.
necessarily our ability to understand something like particle physics. Are there any limits to our understanding ability?
If there are, I don't think we've hit them yet. I mean, we're crafty little creatures, and I think we're really good at figuring out ways to get beyond what is immediately perceptible. So, like the X-ray background of the universe or whatever, like how, why, what? Like the math involved and the technology and all of it is just incredible and mind-blowing, and that's as far back as we can see in time, and that is just cool as fuck. I think we're far enough in that I can curse now. So I think that we can be crafty and creative and get the technology to figure out what's going on with our cognition. I'd like to think so. I'm an optimist in that way, I guess. We have ways at getting around perceptual limits, certainly. We have ways of getting around size issues, sort of like the fMRI, looking at differences in blood flow, and then several assumptions later, looking at differences in cognitive processes that happen during memory or attention or emotions. So I think we're creative and crafty enough to be able to get a good handle on ourselves, but it might be at some point we just reach a limit of this is the most that we can understand about ourselves, and beyond that, we're going to need to tap on AI, or we're going to need to do something that's just not even thought of yet to really be able to understand ourselves. And then you get into kind of Lovecraft territory where can we understand that information at all? If it is something that's inaccessible to us, could we even make sense of whatever comes back? I'd like to think so, but we'll see. We'll see if it happens in our lifetime. If there is a world left to have after that. Okay. So.
A few moments later.
Ooh, meta's being meta. How would we know if it's beyond our possible comprehension? So I think, and maybe my physicist can talk about this a little bit further with quantum mechanics. I think if we get an answer back from, let's say, like UNIVAC or whatever AI thing is set to figure out our consciousness and our cognition, if we get an answer back and like, what does this even mean? Run it again, this doesn't make sense. Get an answer back. Still doesn't make sense. Independent lab has their own master AI thing with their own code solving the same problem. Get a similar answer. Like, okay, we're getting similar answers that we can't make sense of. Either the premise going into the programming that the AI is built on is flawed and it's just leading to bad answers, or welcome to the singularity. Life is never going to be the same. Things are going to change drastically as we accommodate this new stuff, as we try to figure out what it means. So I think that would kind of be a tell that it's beyond our comprehension. But I mean, how did particle physics kick off, since that's just an absolute mindfuck?
Oh boy. The physics is all very simple and it makes predictions. So I don't know how I can add to that necessarily. The same with cosmology. Like the physics is all fairly simple. It's just novel ways to apply it led to interesting revelation.
Well, I think the thing that I'm trying to get out of you is like quantum mechanics. If you haven't had the distinct pleasure of trying to understand, it's not nice and quantized like big things are. So it's like there is one of me. I am sitting here. I'm not just going to sort of superposition or something myself across the room, be in both places, and then like both blink out of existence or something. Like probabilistic stuff doesn't really happen at the person scale.
Okay.
And trying to understand like the Schrodinger stuff. And that's not even that deep in.
Right. I don't know. I still don't know what to add to that conversation.
How do people make sense of quantum mechanics?
They don't. They just follow the math. So here's my analogy. Maybe we have language. Language, we can express many things.
Allegedly.
Math is not unlike language. In fact, it is a language. And I don't know that there is a limit to what we can understand, as long as, hi Cleo, what we can understand, as long as our language can describe the thing. And right now, the math can describe quantum mechanics, can describe more. You can describe 13 dimensions if you want. So we may not intuitively understand it. We may not be able to perceive it in our minds in some sort of reasonable way, but it doesn't mean that we can't describe it and
So
understand.
maybe that's it.
We don't necessarily have the tools to understand particle physics in our head, right? We didn't evolve with quantum mechanical things happening to us, and we just don't have those tools in our head.
The
But
package is not installed.
Yeah, but we have language, and then we have, other ways to communicate now. And to me, there seems to be no limit to what we can describe with language, math, or
Yeah. So maybe that's our saving grace, is be able to put it in terms that make sense to us and we can sort of wrap our heads around, maybe not intuitively grok, but at least mostly understand and work with. So